So the 2026 Japanese Grand Prix is done, and I think it was a pretty positive race in the grand scheme of things, and objectively probably the best race we've had so far this season. A lot of things to unpack. This video will sort of build upon my analysis that I made in yesterday about qualifying, and yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So a few things I want to build on. The last video I touched upon slightly the prospect of McLaren making a comeback, and especially Piastri potentially being a dark horse in this season's championship. Now, right now, Mercedes have a chokehold on both the drivers and the constructors' fronts. Antonelli seems much more competitive than he did last year. That could be an amalgamation of different things. Firstly, most importantly, probably the confidence factor. It's his second year in the sport. And obviously, other factors may include this is a less pure driving dominated regulation. We know F1 is a machinery dependent sport, but when we compare teammates, they have essentially the same vehicle. The minor differences come with, car parts, setup, engine wear, maybe issues during the race that affect them. In the grand scheme of things, these are not significant factors unless they seem to be systemic across races. But this early on in the season, I think Russell and Antonelli essentially have the same tools, and I think they've been fairly equal. But you would not be saying something outrageous if you said Antonelli had the edge over Russell this season. Well, if you look at the wins, Antonelli has 2 wins to Russell's one, and these are 2 deserved wins on merit. Obviously, one big, not just question mark, but problem for Antonelli is the fact that his race starts have been quite subpar. Obviously, we saw in the race today that Russell dropped a lot of positions as well, but Antonelli dropping 5 positions to go from first to sixth is not good, and he really got bailed out by the safety car. Now, even though Antonelli drove a very solid race today, essentially that final stint on the hards, there was no question he was so imperious and just pulled away. Now, obviously, this is where the machine comes in, but he showed there he has the capacity to dominate when he's in that position, and kudos to him. Now, obviously, nothing Piastri really could do on worn tyres, got caught up by the safety car against a much faster car as well. But the thing about Piastri is, going back to Piastri and McLaren, in my opinion, out of the top teams, they look like they're the most confident in terms of the progress they can make. Now, obviously, Mercedes were chuffed after Australia, but there's likely that lingering feeling of, can Ferrari make a comeback? And then there's obviously McLaren, who's the customer team for their engine. And Mercedes will always more likely than not, have the better understanding of the engine than McLaren, which now they almost certainly do, along with perhaps having a slightly better or significantly better chassis. We simply don't know. This may change, because what we're hearing from McLaren is they feel like they can even have the fastest car this season, because obviously the development battle is going to be so fast, predominantly on the chassis front, because we're going to go into an engine freeze pretty soon. But for McLaren, that's not a problem, because McLaren already possess the Mercedes engine. It's simply a matter of, can they understand it, the software behind it, to be able to maximize this engine in a regulation cycle that is very much software contingent. So that's McLaren, immense potential. I think McLaren, along with Red Bull, I think out of the top four, orthodox top four that we've had for in modern times, they both have the most development potential. In terms of McLaren, obviously have a significantly higher floor than Red Bull, and arguably you could make the argument McLaren have already usurped Ferrari, which is crazy to say. I mean, not that crazy, because McLaren were not far off Ferrari in the first 2 races, but the races were dominated by Mercedes Ferrari stories and battles, and obviously in the latter half of the race, Mercedes just riding into the sunset. But Ferrari were comfortably the second best car thus far. But that seems to have changed this weekend. McLaren arguably faster in qualifying, but Leclerc certainly could have got a front row qualifying finish had he not had that oversteer. But judging by the results, McLaren just had the slight edge on Ferrari. In the race, it depended what stint you looked at. Now, in the first initial medium stint, I felt like McLaren had the edge on Ferrari. It could also be that Piastri was in free air in first place, and it was those behind him in the trains that were, killing their tyres in dirty air. In the hard tyre stint, I think Ferrari had the edge. The reason why Norris and Co got past Hamilton, despite Hamilton being on fresher tyres, being fourth, because of the safety car, could have even been third. I think Russell had just clipped him in the safety car phase. Hamilton just had a car issue, I think. Really, there was nothing he could have done. But I think Ferrari had the slight edge on McLaren in terms of car performance. It's a hard tyre stint. Because McLaren, they didn't do any testing with the hards, I think, that weekend. So it was unknown for them. So you could sort of give them a bit of, credit in terms of that, or sort of caveat, I would say, because obviously that makes a difference when you have that data. It affects the way you drive, the setup, etc., etc. But nevertheless, I think it's a big jump for McLaren. I think they really are starting to understand the engine better and the Mercedes power unit, especially on the software side, which is extremely important for them. And we know how good McLaren on the chassis side can develop their car. In 2023, they went from having one of the slowest cars at the start of the season to being out of Q1. I remember in Jeddah, some people were saying the slowest car, to the mid-season having the second best car. I remember I was at Silverstone, McLaren, very excited British crowd that year, 2023. They could have got a double podium there. And by 2024 and 25, having the fastest car, and in 25, obviously a dominant car, bar the last few races where Red Bull made a very strong comeback. So McLaren, do not count them out. I think Piastri is a big dark horse for this season, certainly can make a lot of moves, especially when you've got Russell losing points like this. Pretty much any race that isn't a 1-2 for Mercedes, if they are caught napping later on in terms of development, which I really doubt because their floor is so high, even if their ceiling is not so high, they're going to be racking up so many points, and they already have a great base to work with. So that's McLaren, a lot of promise there. Now Ferrari, now I said that Red Bull and McLaren have a lot of development potential, so do Ferrari, but the engine for architecture that Ferrari has opted for with the small turbo is paying dividends in the race start, but the underlying single lap pace is simply not there. And obviously they're not bad, the single lap pace is pretty good, but it's not good enough to beat the Mercedes. Now the qualifying, it's fine to qualify third and fourth if you're going to be first and second by the end of the first turn or first lap. But when we go, and that is sustainable because their engine architecture gives them a systemic advantage in race starts. But when it comes to the race distance, you can nowhere near count on that. You need a car that's going to be firing on all cylinders lap after lap in terms of tyre wear, and critically in terms of battery management and deployment, which is essentially what these regulations are about. It's part and parcel of these 2026 regulations, and most likely the regulation cycle going forward, because I really don't see much being done to alter the state of affairs we have now. So Ferrari, they're going to really need to find a solution to that fast, because I think in terms of the chassis, they can have a superior chassis to Mercedes. It will only pay dividends for them in tracks like Monaco that is really not energy intensive, the least energy intensive tracks like that, high downforce tracks where they can really use their chassis, which is already very competitive, I think. But on the engine side, if they unlock a lot of performance, they can really make some moves. Mercedes, as I said, they've got a very high floor. In terms of how high the ceiling is, we'll just have to wait and see. Obviously, it's going to be a fast development battle. They may even have more in the tank in terms of understanding the power unit. I mean, they probably do because it's still early days. But I think we just have to wait and see. But I think, judging by this race, I think even though these regulations are quite flawed in some ways, there's also big benefits. And I think once teams start to understand this new engine architecture more, the different development pathways that teams are going, like Ferrari compared to the Mercedes, perhaps Mercedes has a higher power ceiling, but if Ferrari can ensure they have, the best chassis combined with their blistering starts, they can really, begin to make some moves. McLaren, as I said, is contingent on understanding the Mercedes engine better, not falling too far behind of Mercedes, and simply trying to outdevelop them as much as they can. Red Bull, I haven't really discussed them much, only briefly. Really, they were out of the picture this race. This race was dominated by the top three teams. That's really where the bulk of the discussion is. Red Bull, though, I think, as I said before, have a lot of development potential. The car is so unbalanced, but I think the pure pace, there is potential there. We saw how good Hadjar was in Australia. That shows the Red Bull powertrains. The power unit itself, I think, is quite competitive. In terms of when it comes to energy, electricity deployment, that realm, it's probably second best after the Mercedes, maybe third, slightly behind Ferrari. But as we know, and as I mentioned multiple times, the Ferrari engine architecture with a small turbo, it's not really about sheer power, it's about that race starts and sort of exploiting that aspect of these regulations. So Red Bull, I'm like 99.9% sure their issues are predominantly with the chassis, and that's where they're going to try and fix it in this 1 month break or 5 week break. And yeah, I think they'll make a big leap forward, but they obviously need to find ways to, shed that weight in the car, which hopefully for them will improve the weight distribution and the weight reduction. Sort of a twofold way they can gain performance. But it's going to be a hard thing to do, but I think they really understand now what they need to do. We'll just wait and see, because right now Red Bull are not in a good position. Gasly with Alpine did an amazing job in the race to keep Verstappen behind, but it is concerning for Red Bull that they're getting outpaced by Haas, Alpine, even Audi at certain points, and Audi being a works team with their own engine. I think it speaks volumes about, and actually Verstappen being outqualified by the sister team driver Lindblad. It says actually the Red Bull engine is competitive enough, but really there are some fundamental issues with the chassis. But nevertheless, Red Bull have brilliant facilities, brilliant personnel, and certainly they have enough funding. So I think Red Bull really, in terms of developing that chassis, they're going to get to the bottom of it. And end of the year, or at least even in the mid-season, or even in a couple races, we may see a different Red Bull, more competitive Red Bull. But with Verstappen not enjoying these regulations, are we really going to be seeing this Red Bull driven to its maximum? I don't know. Because really, the way these cars are driven, it's not like the pure on-edge maximization we've seen in F1 in its history. Unfortunately, it's a very different kind of Formula E-esque energy management championship, you could say. But I say maximization by Verstappen, but you've got Hadjar, who's, I think, done a stellar job thus far. He's been very close to Verstappen and obviously produced when Verstappen was out of the picture, pretty much close to maximizing that car, if not maximizing it already. And I'm excited to see what he can do and what the team can do to turn this around, because I believe they can. But I think in terms of the development battle overall, we're in a very exciting situation with that. Obviously, Merc has the cards now, they're the most advantaged. But keep an eye out on what Ferrari and McLaren can do in the next few races. Obviously, we got this big break. They'll be bringing some massive major upgrades, doing stuff behind the scenes. But Red Bull, also keep an eye out on them, how they can close the gap, because Red Bull, they've got a lot of limiting factors. Once they get those limiting factors out the way, they're going to gain a chunk of time. Once they do that, they can focus on just bringing upgrades, developing this car so that it can actually fight for wins. But yeah, that's my takes on the Japanese Grand Prix. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.